Welcome to the Mockingcast, the podcast of Mockingbird Ministries. I'm David Zoll, your host, and in a few moments, I'll be joined by my co-hosts, Sarah Condon and RJ Heyman. We come to you every other week to discuss a few of the places where we currently see grace and its absence playing out in unexpected and compelling ways. We're glad to have you with us.
Praise the Lord. Praise the Lord. God.
Well, November is here. The leaves in Virginia have fallen from the trees, and it's time to record another Mockingcast. Not much happening in the world. Before we dive into sort of larger things, though, how are you guys doing? What's new?
Fine. One day at a time. Every day's a new day. I'm looking forward to Thanksgiving. That's going to be really fun. I'll be in Virginia, Dave. Kind of your neck of the woods. I'll be up in D.C. area visiting my mom and my brother. All my brothers are coming in, and Jonathan Adams and his family. So looking forward to that. But yeah, prepping for Christmas. What can I say?
Still in
Every
the
day's
sprint.
a new day. Yeah, the sprint to Christmas.
Well, what about you, Sarah? I know you've just come back from far away, right? Weren't you in Arizona or something?
Yeah, I was in Arizona. Yes. But thank you so much for asking how I'm doing. I have called all my Black friends, especially my Black female friends, and my gay friends, and especially my friends who are women who've been sexually assaulted. That's what I've been doing this week. So thank you so much for asking, checking in on them.
I called you to hear how you were doing.
And you checked in on me. I thought of that today. I was like, and then Dave checked in on you, which was like really sweet. So thank you. It meant a lot to me.
Well, I was reminded, that we're recording this a little bit over a week after the election. When it comes out, it'll be 2 weeks after the election. So
yeah,
there's lots of emotions and lots of fear and lots of disappointment. Also lots of I told you so's and lots of lectures and sort of some gloating out there. It's the American political landscape has not dramatically healed, and it's sad. So
yeah, I keep kind of thinking about writing about how, half the country is really in like official grief right now. And, how I love Judaism and how people should just kind of be sitting Shiva for the people who are grieving, right? And showing up and checking in on them kind of regardless, hopefully, of which side they landed on. So yeah, that vision and that idea has brought me some comfort over the past week.
Yeah. Regardless of I think it's so wise, Sarah. I mean, regardless of what a person feels about, the issues or even how they voted, if you love other people, you allow them to feel what they're going to feel. And,
right.
And especially when it comes to grief.
Yeah.
And it's very difficult, I think, in our media environment where there's hot take after hot take after hot take.
Yeah.
And that oftentimes is heard as a way to tell people you shouldn't feel this way, or you should be quiet, or I don't know. I just know that the noise is so loud, and as people know on this podcast, we really try not to increase that noise. But I don't want to be out of touch in the way that I'm hearing a lot about these days. So
yeah, I've stopped listening to public radio, so that's where we are, guys. I'm now listening to music in my car like a schmuck.
Hey. There's some of us who
I will have
treasure
no
that
idea what's happening in Bosnia, unfortunately. So anyway,
I think it was Cal Newport. One of these people said like he gets his news in print, like in like that's
so smart
once a week and things like that. So I don't know if that's
smart.
Realistic.
Let's bring back newspapers.
I mean, the truth is I live in a much bluer place than the two of you guys. So it's like the public outpouring of grief. I would say it's nowhere near the level that it was in 2016. It's pronounced, it's serious, but it's not like a neutron bomb had gone off in the way that it was like people showing up on Sunday. Both, we have a very purple congregation.
Sure.
But people shell shocked. Like everyone was like, "Whoa, we live in a bubble here in this town." So we're fielding that, but I'm especially cognizant as the demographics as we hear about, but the largest divergence was between college-educated white men and college-educated white women. That's everybody else pretty much got further closely aligned, I think. I don't really know. I'm not a pollster. I'm sort of sick of hearing about it, but I do know that we speak to a audience that is a lot of college-educated white women and men.
Yeah.
And that's painful. It's hard. Those are marriages. Those are
marriages. Those are marriages. Yeah.
Those are families.
For sure. Absolutely. Yeah.
Thanksgiving is coming. So
yeah.
There was something like hopeful I heard. This American Life was talking about just kind of this divide in our country, and that runs through a lot of households. And they talked to couples who were on different side of the political spectrum. And one thing they found helpful was this newsletter from this guy in Pennsylvania called Tangle, which of course I love already because it's close to the name of my favorite movie.
Yeah.
But that he does a really good job of, tackling sort of one issue per newsletter, saying, hey, here's what the best people on the right are saying, here's what the best people on the left are saying in a very even-handed way. And then kind of here's my take, and how that actually had been a mechanism for husbands and wives to be able to talk to each other again and kind of to save their marriages, because they were kind of on the brink of divorce.
Yeah.
So I found that to be hopeful. I also, I don't know, the amount of people I've heard over the last, now 16 years, I guess, 4 elections on both sides who start to question the existence of God because their candidate didn't win. On both sides, Democrats and Republicans being like, I'm struggling. I don't know if I can believe in God anymore because this thing happened, because this candidate was elected. I don't know. It's telling about what our priorities and our idols are. I find it's concerning. It's concerning to me.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And being in a congregation that is, we get along really well, but I know because I see people on social media that people are all over, the landscape in terms of their emotional reactions to this.
Well, we're going to start with something that I think was a sign of was a hopeful thing. This is in the New York Times, and it's by Adam Grant. Adam Grant is a social psychologist who you've heard us quote many times on here. Kind of a sort of a big deal. He said this. This is the title. If you're sure how the next 4 years will play out, I promise you're wrong. He wrote this. Humans may be the only species that can imagine an unknown future, but that doesn't mean we're any good at it. We're routinely wrong about which career we'll choose, where we'll end up moving, and whom we'll end up loving. We fail even more miserably when we try to predict the outcomes of national and global events. In a landmark study, the psychologist Philip Tetlock evaluated several decades of predictions about political and economic events. He found that, quote, the average expert was roughly as accurate as a dart-throwing chimpanzee. Acknowledging that the future is unknowable can bring some comfort when it feels as if the world is shattered. It can also offer a dose of humility sorely needed in a chaotic world. Our struggles to predict the future aren't limited to events, though, and he talks about World War II and the Treaty of Versailles and things like that. They apply to our feelings, too. In the heat of the moment, we over-index on our anguish today and underestimate our capacity to adapt tomorrow. Elections are a perfect case study. In 2008, studies showed that John McCain's supporters overestimated how unhappy they would be after Mr. Obama won the election. In 2016, when Mr. Trump beat Hillary Clinton, research revealed that although stress was high among her supporters on election night, their moods started to recover within a day or two. Political defeat is an example of what psychologists call ambiguous loss. We may be mourning the death of our hopes and dreams, but it's temporary. We forget that unlike people, plans can be resurrected. That was true for Trump supporters in 2020, and it's true for Democrats now. It's unsettling to realize that we have no power to predict the future, because it means we aren't in control of our fate. At the best of times, that can leave us holding our breath. But in the worst of times, embracing uncertainty proves liberating. It reminds us how quickly our fortune can change. I think what Grant is getting at here is something I tried to talk about in low anthropology, about their limitations, not only on what we can do as humans, but on what we can know. And that what one philosopher calls epistemological modesty, meaning always holding out hope that you don't know for certain what's going to happen, let alone what another person is going to say, means that you can hold the door open for surprise and hope and dialogue and all of these things. Whether or not his column is the timing is right for it, I don't know. But I also know that the day after the election, I saw all these headlines saying, here's what will happen next. Here's the next 4 years, we'll map them out for you. And he's basically saying the second you map it out, you've gotten it wrong. Like that's I find that to be a hopeful thing. And again, I'm saying this as a person who describes myself as sort of aggressively apolitical, but still in touch with the cares and concerns, hopefully, of the people around me, that we don't know. We don't know. So, but what do you guys think about this article?
I think two things. The first thing I think is that this sounds really nice, but also I have a lot of fear that does feel founded. So I mean, I'll just be honest, Dave. Like I talked to my sister-in-law the other day on the phone. They want to have another baby. And she's like, oh my God, what if something's wrong with the pregnancy? What will that mean? Like, that's real. That's a real fear that feels like it could be imminent. We could be wrong. I could be wrong. But that, sort of, I mean, I think a lot of women I know at that age have kind of gone into more of a preparation mindset.
Yeah.
That is a thing I hold right now.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I hold is that I have been through someone who knows true despair. I am someone who has not gotten off the couch for a whole year because the despair was so great. Dave, I know that depression can feel very similar. Like when you know true, seemingly hopeless despair, it's kind of the last thing you want to do if you have any control over the situation, right? You kind of want to do everything you can to buttress yourself against it, because the reality is, my kids lost me for a solid year, and I don't know what it would take for me to crawl into a pit of despair again, but it would take a lot more than this, like a lot more than this. So I kind of, I heard an influencer who does a lot of really beautiful social justice work. I can't remember her name now. I've talked about her before in here, but anyway, we can post the link. But she's a Black woman, and she said, rarely talks about her faith. And she said, there's something quintessentially Christian about hope. And for me, that's like the most important thing is like hope in all circumstances. And also, like, we have a beautiful liturgy that we pray for the president. And like, that's, God, I mean, there's a lot of things the Episcopal Church screws up, but like, there's something about like the hope, the whisper of hope, even in the midst of fear and the unknown. And yeah, I mean, I guess if I can talk myself through it, Dave, like, yeah, there is some comfort in not actually knowing what the future is going to be like. There's some comfort there. I do think that's a real truth.
When I've been severely at the darkest depression, it's a lack, it's a conclusivity, it's a certainty that things will never get better, and I will always feel this way. And that's not actually he's basically saying you may feel that way, but that kind of certainty is simply unavailable to us. And I do find comfort in that. I mean, I'm speaking as a person who's not in that funk, or in that ditch right this moment. But yeah, I remember Alan Jacobs saying something about how, low anthropology, or sort of just a Christian idea of human nature, can sometimes sound defeatist. But he's like, but the truth is, as Christians, we don't do hopeless. We don't do hopeless. If there's always hope, because God is somehow, such a beautiful, in some way. Like I can go 99% of the way with this analysis of the entrenchment of this system and that person and this psychology.
Sure.
But as a Christian, we don't do hopeless. That's just that's off the table. And so if we've gone there, something about our faith isn't computing, or at least we've left Jesus in a different behind in some way.
Because even like, I mean, even what is it, the liturgy for is it the liturgy for a funeral? RJ, you've done so many funerals. Like, even unto the grave, I make my song.
Even
Alleluia,
at the grave, we
alleluia.
make our song. Yeah. All we go
Yeah,
down to the dust, yet even at the grave, we
yeah,
make our song.
Well,
yeah.
RJ, I'd love to hear from you. And what do you think of this article?
I really like this article. I mean, you've touched on this already. It makes me think of mindfulness therapy
Mm,
a little bit, learning to recognize that feelings come and go like waves on a beach. They crash in and recede, and how you're feeling. I mean, there's a lot of mornings I remind myself of that because I wake up and I'm like, I'm not excited about today, but I'm going to get up and get in the shower and have a cup of coffee and drive my kid to school and trust that I may not feel the same way 10 minutes from now that I feel right now. So I think that's a very helpful thought. I think it's just also incredibly helpful when it comes to parenting, being married, being in a relationship with other people, just recognizing that if someone is no matter what someone is going through, whether it's puberty or rage or grief, whatever it is, just to hold them in the midst of that and not to overreact. I think we get ourselves into so much trouble in relationships and probably parenting especially, but also marriage, when we overreact
yeah.
and don't just let someone have their moment,
We
let
take
them
it
grieve.
personally, like
We
in
take
some
it
way.
absolutely.
And we need to fix it. We need to make it go away. And sometimes, sometimes it feels personal. Sometimes it becomes personal. But even when someone says it's personal, it might not be personal,
Right.
So to let the storm rage and to, I don't know, to just kind of hold it, allow it to be, love it, know that it can't rage forever and that there will be kind of a calm after the storm, Yeah, I think that's the only way to get through, like, your kid's puberty,
Yeah. Or
or
perimenopause.
yeah, I was gonna say, or your wife's or menopause, or your husband's depression, or his professional angst, or whatever it
Oh,
might
yeah.
be.
Yeah.
Try overreacting and trying to fix things, or telling someone to get their act together or to relax is not helpful.
But that's
Yeah.
usually a result of us being threatened by what the person is feeling, or
Yes,
taking it personally. That there's a slogan that I love in
or fearful. Yeah,
recovery circles, just a Q-tip, Q-tip, Q-tip. Quit taking it personally. And I know that the
Mm,
law very often increases the trespass, but in theory, most of the time when I am being reactive to another person's anger, disappointment, sadness, fear, it's because in some way I've taken it as a comment upon myself or something that or our family or something that I then need to fix. Q-tip, man. That's been a
Dude, that's
helpful
not a
slogan.
law. That's like a way to bring grace into the room. That's
There you
not a
go.
law at all. You know what I mean? Like, I also just want to say, like, what if beautiful things happen over the next 4 years? Like, for
Exactly.
crying out loud. And that's the other thing is, like, I got a 10-year-old and a 14-year-old. You're not about to tell me that the last 4 years that I have this beautiful, complicated, hilarious, intelligent son at home, a boy who this morning, when he heard my alarm go off at 5 a.m., went to the gym with me, just to hang out with his mom and like pump some iron. You know what I mean? Like, you can't tell me these next 4 years aren't going to have a lot of beauty in them. Like,
No,
you can't tell me that. You can't tell me that my 10-year-old daughter, who joined a dance team at her middle school that I did not realize, but happens to be like an HBCU, like majorette dance team, of which she is one of the only white children. You can't tell me that's not going to be a beautiful next few years. Are you
surprise.
kidding?
That's what
Yeah. Like,
Leslie Jameson said. That's kind of her working definition of God or of grace is surprise.
yeah.
And we're surprised by these things. Jamie Smith, I wrote an article, James K. Smith wrote, said, but even our political systems are not immune from the incursion of grace. And
Right.
things could
Ooh,
happen, like
Dave.
it's, but also I know that
That's
I
good.
didn't see it coming, falling in love, the good things, what my child's personality was going to be like. And yes, the crazy stuff they say that's delightful and enervating and like just out of the box. That is not the stuff I can predict. And thank God for the stuff that we don't control over.
Amen.
So, let's move on to the next thing, though. And so, for out of the frying pan into the fire a little bit
Yeah.
here.
Oh,
This is not politics, but I did run this just so listeners know. I ran this by Sarah because I knew it was potentially, just deeply resonant or upsetting. But
I
this
mean,
is
Grey's Anatomy did make me cry last night. So.
What breaks through the Lexapro bubble this
Grey's
week?
Anatomy.
You be the guest. No one can predict. No one knows.
No one knows.
It's uncertainty. Adam Grant is right.
No, yeah.
This is in the New York Times as well by Catherine Pearson, an article about the unspoken grief of never becoming a grandparent. Now, none of us are in the situation of becoming grandparents quite yet, I hope, but it is.
RJ could be, just to name it, but
I totally
sure.
could be. I absolutely could be.
What am I thinking? You're totally right. Oh my gosh, I stand
it could
corrected.
happen anytime.
And in Mississippi, I could be. So keep going.
We've already told both their boys if there's anything unexpected, we will take the baby. Give us the baby now. We will take the baby.
You guys love babies.
Yeah, we want the baby. Marshall needs a younger brother or younger sister. So
it's true.
As long as Jimmy doesn't have to carry it and have it, we'll give it to us.
There you go. Grace and practice, RJ. Once again. This is by Catherine Pearson. I said, a growing number of Gen Xers and baby boomers are facing the sometimes painful fact that they're never going to become grandparents. A little more than half of adults 50 and older had at least one grandchild in 2021, down from nearly 60% in 2014. Wow. Amid falling birth rates, more U.S. adults say they're unlikely to ever have children for a variety of reasons. Chief among them, they just don't want to.
College tuition.
There's lots of different reasons, and I think we've talked about this before. Would be, but I've never really gone from the extra step to thinking about grandparents. Would-be grandparents may experience a deep sense of longing and loss when their children opt out of parenthood, even if they understand at an intellectual level that their children do not owe them a family legacy. That's what Claire Bidwell Smith, a therapist based in Los Angeles, said. It doesn't help that our society tends to paint grandchildren as a reward for aging. Miss Bidwell Smith said, you always hear people talk about how great it is to be a grandparent, how it's better than being a parent. I think when people don't get to experience that, there's a very real grief that comes with it. It's a kind of grief, she said, that our culture tends not to recognize, though, and that people don't know how to talk about. Dr. Maggie Mulqueen, who has counseled many baby boomers through their longing for grandchildren, has found that the decision to remain child-free can strain the parent-child relationship, particularly when a parent who has dreamed of grandchildren fails to separate any personal disappointment they feel from a sense of being disappointed in their children. The situation can feel like a personal rejection for older parents, Dr. Mulqueen said. Some of her clients ask themselves, did I mess up as a parent so much that my kids don't want to have children? And when one's peer group, other grandparents, or other sort of 60-somethings, is deep in the trenches of grandparenthood, shuttling kids to soccer practices and ballet recitals, or spending disposable income on plane tickets for family visits, it can also make those without grandchildren feel left out in the cold. It's like when your friends are getting married, or when your friends are having children and you are not. They interviewed one grandchildless lady, Miss Perry, who said, okay, I won't be able to do these things with grandchildren. So what can I do to fill that need instead? She said she stays busy with her husband, dogs, book club, and playing mahjong. But she also feels a bit alone as time goes by. Grandchildren bring such hope and light into your life, she said. To have that is a counterbalance, I think, to aging, because aging is hard. Ms. Perry's husband does what he can to avoid romanticizing the grandparent experience, clocking when friends grumble about having become an overworked babysitter. Still, he feels pangs of sadness, particularly when he and Miss Perry pass a park full of happy kids, or when he reminisces about his own grandfather, who immigrated from Sicily and was in many ways more of a father figure than his own dad was. He said, speaking of himself and his wife, I think we both would have loved to pay that gift of unconditional love and guidance back in spades if we were grandparents. But not to be.
Find a church. Find a church that, if you want surrogate grandchildren, go find a church, because there are churches that need you. There are children and parents that need you.
There's children and parents that
this totally might change my approach to recruiting volunteers for children's ministry.
Yes.
Don't have grandkids. Wish you did. Here are 40 children.
Here
who
you
would love
go.
for you 1
Yes.
hour a week on Sunday morning to be their
Yes.
surrogate grandparent.
Yes,
Yeah.
Sarah, you've
absolutely.
experienced that. You've experienced that in practice.
Huge.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Kim and David, like, we invited them into our lives before my parents died because we didn't have Josh's parents present. And they stepped in such a huge way. I mean, I will never forget David Robinson rolling in, and he is like a sharp dresser. Okay. Rolls in his like bright yellow Porsche wearing an avocado button down shirt that my son had picked out for him at Target to go lay on the floor of the aquarium in Galveston for a Boy Scout trip. Like, the stuff that these people have done. I mean, Kim showed up when we moved here, like, to move us in. Like, it's been such a deeply like back and forth beautiful relationship. Like, we are all winning in this relationship. I mean, Kim calls me her daughter. Like, and she's like not, I mean, she's probably 5 feet tall and she's blonde. And so we'll be out and people are like, oh my God, is this your mom? And she's like, yep. She just like cuts them off, you know, and I know they're looking at us like, the hell does her dad look like, you know, but it's like, it's so
He's
beautiful.
in the NBA.
Yes, exactly. It's so beautiful to be like held like that. I mean, I was just in Arizona at a retreat for St. Philip's in the Hills, which was incredible. Amazing. And Taylor Devine, who's listened to us from the very beginning, is the priest there. And she did such a beautiful job. But we actually talked about, I mean, I talked about this in my talk, like how important it is, you know, in church world. I do want to speak to this. Parents often pick their churches because they're like, well, they've got a really good youth group, right? And sometimes that means they've got a lot of fog machines and weird theology, just for the record. Like, let's really pay attention to what a really good youth group is. I will remind you that in my youth group, we just like were left to our own devices and listened to gangster rap and played Spin the Bottle. And now I'm an Episcopal priest. So, okay. But like, I actually don't give a shit about I mean, I love our youth program. Okay. She does an amazing job. It's amazing. But like, I would never pick a church from the youth program. I would pick a church because I want to know if there's somebody named like Beverly or Kathy or, you know, Debbie who
Nancy.
like
Karen.
Nancy, Karen, even
Ooh,
Karen, who runs
Definitely
the
Karen.
Acolyte program. Do you know what I mean? Like, I need some older woman to walk up to my surly son and say, hey, you got a crucifer this week. Sorry, we don't have anybody. And he's just like, yeah, okay. Like, I need my kids to have like elderly lady friends, you know, and gentlemen. Like, it's so life-giving for everybody. So anyway, that's my rant on this.
No,
like,
it's a beautiful.
go to church.
It's a great invitation to church. I think it's
Yeah.
also. I think we're dealing with a little bit something somewhat similar to the estrangement epidemic, in that you have probably. This is a little bit of the fallout of that over therapization, or that we talk about, not therapy itself, but that sort of constant focusing on one's own needs at the expense of other people. And basically this sort of that this starts in a wonderful place and kind of taking care of yourself and veers into sort of like no one else's needs matter. And also there's a real certainty about the future. Like I don't want to. It's really hard, frankly, not to judge a little bit some of the peers who say I don't want kids, because I've seen so many of them reverse that decision later on. But for some people, it's very complicated. And I remember we were talking about depression. I remember talking to a guy who said they decided not to have kids because depression has been so crippling for he and his family. And he said, I just can't inflict that on the world. It wasn't a political thing. It wasn't an environmental thing. But there is a level of hope and faith involved in having a child that, despite the dumpster fire I see in front of me, there might be.
It's a terrible
some chance.
decision at all times, and yet,
but it's also it's a terrible financial decision. But it's
it
also
is.
it's
My
also
mom always said, never enough time, never enough money.
No,
but it's also an
no.
act of humility, saying like, and you know, all of the, let's face it, all of these surveys we cite say that the more you're serving other people, the actually happier you will, more fulfilled you will be. And what other way is there to serve other people, serve your parents at least, than this way? I know it's not that complicated. I know it's much more complicated than that, but that's certainly where part of my brain goes. And I also say this on the week that my older brother and his wife, Sarah Beth and John, had a baby.
Come on now.
And it was a miracle baby. It was a baby that had long been sought after, and they had gone through, I don't know, disclose too much, but lots of obstacles to this, and is something they never thought would happen has happened. And when I tell you the joy, and this baby was born on election day,
Praise God.
which in New York City, which was a strange place to be. And let me tell you, the cares and concerns of the world did not invade that room. There was nothing but joy and excitement. And my brother wearing a ridiculous Falco t-shirt, along with his infant son, Johnny, who's also wearing a Falco onesie. If you know Falco,
Aw.
Rock Me Amadeus, that's all I have to say before I hear from RJ.
I was thinking that I think for a lot of grandparents, and I'm not a grandparent, but I had a sense this is what my father was doing. Whether they know it or not, being a good grandparent is a way to make up for all the ways they blew it when they were a parent. And I've got to think that's part of the mourning. I think a lot of parents
Wow.
look back and they're like, I spent too much time at the office. I wasn't as present as I should have been. I wasn't the parent that I should have been. But now I get a do-over. And I get to pour all this, now that I have more time and I have more money, I can pour all of myself and my love into this grandchild and kind of make up for how I fell short with my own children. And I just think there has to be some element of that. They don't, if you don't have grandkids, you don't get a chance for a do-over, and you're just kind of, and I say that because I've said before, I had a problematic relationship with my father. There's a lot of things we never worked out because he died very unexpectedly at like age 74. But I felt that he loved my sons in a way, in a present kind of way, that he just wasn't there for me as a father. And that was actually healing for me to see.
Absolutely.
To see him love them in that way. And I've got to think, I don't think he probably never ever thought about it that way. But I think that's a factor at play here.
I do want to say, Dave, that I think only the Zoll family would have a baby born on the day of the most contentious election that we've seen in a while. Like, what a injection of God's humor and grace that you guys had a baby born in your family that day.
Really, and no one saw this one coming. Let me tell you.
Yeah.
If we could have written the future, this would not have been a part of it. The baby at all. Certainly not on that day. It was a week before the due date.
I think I do want to speak to the people who are listening to this, though, who are grandparents age, who don't have grandchildren, who are older and don't have grandchildren. Try not to take it out on your adult kids. And also,
yeah.
I mean,
and don't take it personally.
We've had to, we've had to completely rewrite the holidays. And I mean, it's not that the grandchildren aren't there, it's that the grandparents aren't there anymore. And so when we gather with my brother and sister-in-law, and we've got 3 kids between all of us, we've had to find different ways to make it fun and joyful and not get caught into the despair of it. So this year we've all got to do PowerPoint presentations that are 5 minutes long about things that we think everyone needs to know. And
really?
our 18-month-old nephew is going to get up and show us his favorite toy and tell us about it with the limited language skills he has and show us that he can jump. That's what we're doing this year for the holidays. Find a way to make joy. It sucks to not have everyone in the room that you wish was in the room. But you do have these people in the room with you. So find a way to love them and have joy with them, for God's sake. You know?
I mean, you care for those who are there rather than those who aren't. And that's
right.
I don't see this is not a denial of the grief and the loss, especially when you're seeing your peers. That's helpful. That's a compassionate thing for me to hear. It's because that I hear, how many times have I counseled people? It's I see all my friends getting married, and it's when's it going to be my turn? And if that door shuts, of course you're going to grieve. But I do just want to echo, institutional decline or what have you. This is an actual place where the church served in a horizontal way. I mean, you don't even talk about God, though I think it's many times an echo of the Holy Spirit's sort of power in the world, is creating these sort of surrogate new families. I think it can be very beautiful. But hey, it's one thing the church does actually pretty well still, because before kids go to youth group, they're usually just allowed to be children. And it's nice, by the way, to see that The best Christmas pageant ever is now in theaters. RJ was directed by the guy who does The Chosen, so you're probably going to watch it.
Ooh, RJ.
Pete Holmes
I'm
is in
waiting
it.
for the White Lotus version of the best Christmas pageant.
I think Judy Greer and Pete Holmes are in it. They're fairly. This doesn't
Called
feel
Bad Santa.
like a Christian ghetto movie. Maybe it is, but Jane Grizzle, whose opinion I trust, and
She loved it.
Not to say my own kids who went while I was out of town, they loved it, and I
Good.
think it's sort of one of those stories that it's very hard to get wrong, but a lot of that's about children being insane and being surrounded by a cloud of witnesses that's has to love them no matter what. Well, let's move on to a slightly different subject here. This is an amazing essay written by Thea Lim. She's an author of, she's like a sci-fi author in Canada, but she wrote for the Walrus website, which is a very thoughtful Canadian website. The Collapse of Self-Worth in the Digital Age. Now, we haven't talked about this in a little while, but this is what she talks about having grown up as a writer and then releasing a book and what that did. She said this: during my fine arts degree, we heard again and again that the only gauge for art is your own measure. And when I started teaching writing, I'd preach the same thing to my students. But when the reception to my book, she had a book that came out in, I think, 2016, started to roll in, I'd hear good news, but gratitude lasted moments before I wanted more. A starred review from Publishers Weekly was great, but it wasn't in the picks of the week. I was glued to my numbers, my stats, like a day trader. Nothing was enough. Why? What had defined my adult existence was my ability to find worth within, to build an internal schematic, which is what artists do. Now I was a stranger to myself. My scale of worth had torn off like a roof in a hurricane, replaced with an external one where there was no top. Then I was shortlisted for a major prize. It took me on a world tour, listed me among authors who are certifiable geniuses. I thought my endless accounting could stop, that this would be enough for me. I could get back to who I was, but I couldn't. My center was gone. One of the defining qualities of being at work on a job is how efficiently output is converted into a number. In 1994, Philip Agre described this as the, quote, capture model, or the deliberate reorganization of industrial work activities to allow computers to track them in real time. What does that mean? Lim writes, 30 years after Agre coined the capture model, workforce management technology can track every moment at work as a production target. Amazon's units per hour score, Uber and Lyft's base fares, and Domino's pizza tracker have made it possible to time all time, even in the break room or toilet stall. These are extreme examples, but they're echoed across the work world with the datafication of parts of performance that used to be too baggy or obscure to crunch, and so are ours to keep. There must exist professions that are free from capture, or scorekeeping, we might say. But I'm hard-pressed to find them. Even non-remote jobs where work cannot pursue the worker home are dogged by digital tracking. A farmer, I know, says Instagram story views directly correlate to farm subscriptions. A server tells me her manager won't give her the Saturday night money shift until she has more followers. Even religious guidance can be quantified by view counts for online church services. Ha ha ha. Yelp for spirituality. One priest told The Guardian recently, you have this thing about how many followers you have. It hits at your gut, at your heart. But, Lim writes, we all know this. What we hardly talk about is how we've reorganized not just industrial activity, but any activity to be capturable by computer, a radical expansion of what can be mined. Even engaging with art can be spat out as a figure on Goodreads or your Spotify year in review. We are all data workers. The internet was designed to stop us from ever switching it off. It moves at the speed of light with constantly changing metrics fueled by ludic loops or repeated cycles of uncertainty, anticipation, and feedback. In other words, it works exactly like a jackpot 6,000 slot machine. Social media apps like Instagram operate like phone games. They've replaced classics like Candy Crush, but the game is simply your sense of self. There's no way around it. We are not giving away our value, as a puritanical grandparent might scold. We are giving away our facility to value. We've been cored like apples, a dependency created, hooked on the public internet to tell us the worth. Every notification ping holds the possibility that we have merit. When we scroll, What are we looking for? It's a lot of reading from Dave, but scorekeeping in all things, in church things, in life. As speak as a writer, I see what she's talking about 110%. It's oppressive. It's unbearable in many ways. We've come from a season of polling and constant numbers and arithmetic and all this stuff. It just feels everywhere. And I don't know about you, but I find it pretty dehumanizing. But I'd love to hear from you. What does this article make you think?
I'm mixed on it because I remember my first job in ministry. I was like 22 years old. I was working for this Presbyterian church out in California, and I was starting a new kind of young adult ministry there. And they had an all church retreat early on. And we brought like a few people. But I remember saying to my boss, I was like, gosh, I really hope next year maybe we bring like 30 or 40 young adults to this. And I was like, but it's not about numbers. It's not about numbers. I immediately said. And he's like, RJ, like numbers are fine. The Bible's obsessed with numbers. We know how many people Jesus fed. We know how many people converted on Pentecost. There's a lot of talk about numbers in the Bible. So, and being part of a denomination that has prided itself on not being numbers driven for like a long time, and we're just like dying.
Yeah.
Like I know. Sorry, I'm sorry to say this again. But I don't know. When I heard the new presiding bishop speak recently, he was talking about how people are like, well, he's like, yes, I know that wherever two or more are gathered in Jesus' name, that's church. But he's like, but let's remember, guys, that's the minimum. That's the minimum.
Right.
That's not the target.
Yeah, exactly. That's the minimum. So am I totally numbers obsessed? Like, yes, I am.
Yeah, I was like, you are.
I am, and I wish I wasn't, and I wish, I don't know. And I also think, I hope, I don't know, I guess I hope if you're, right, this is where we get into like the boundary between the theology of glory and the theology of the cross. Right? Like I believe 100% in the theology of the cross and death and resurrection and forgiveness for sinners, and that God works in unexpected ways, and that oftentimes the thing we most fear becomes the path to liberation and hope. I think that's all 100% true. And I also kind of feel if you're effectively preaching that message, more people will be coming to church. So I don't know how to hold like
God bless you, RJ.
If and when my church just falls apart and is shrinking, I'll be like, well, I guess I blew it. So what I tend to do is give God the credit when things are going well, and then I take things personally when they're not. So
back to the same refrain here. I love it. All right,
that sounds great.
It's a great. I highly recommend it.
Yeah.
I highly recommend it.
Yeah.
So, but I also This is me speaking personally. I also deeply believe that in Christianity, the ends never justify the means. And all we're called to do is to love other people, to preach the gospel, to pray, to trust him, and then just like see what happens. Like I don't think I would ever do anything that was contrary. Well, I shouldn't say ever. I hope I wouldn't do a lot of things contrary to my conscience or Jesus for the sake of growth. My gosh. But I'm also a sinner with an ego. So those are my thoughts. Sarah, what do you think?
Well, you started talking about church numbers, and I started thinking about that a little bit. I do want to say I think across the board, like one thing I've learned about numbers is you have to hold them really lightly.
Totally. Yeah.
Right? Like we definitely spent, especially early in our ministry, we would look around and be like, oh, like, why aren't there more people here? And there needs to blah, 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 blah. And now it's like, I'm in this like kind of like, I don't want to say obliviousness, but I really try not, it doesn't even register with me. And I'm so sorry to say this. Suffering is sanctification. That happened after mom and dad died. Like even in Houston, I was like, I don't care who's here. Like I was just like, there's something about that kind of ripped. Like I couldn't even lightly hold it anymore. It just ripped it away from me. And I do think to talk about broader culture and to talk about, because I'm definitely on social media, to talk about the kind of feedback loop that we really get from these like tiny slot machines that we carry around in our pockets is also like trying to hold that lightly. And then when I can't, just letting go of it for a while, recognizing that it is actually work, that it's actually not like necessarily a place of grace, but it is like work to engage it, and like that we need rest from work. I'm always interested when I hear celebrities say that they took like 3 months off of social media or they didn't get on the internet for, you know what I mean? Like, I think we're wise to like hear that and think like it's work. Like, it's not, this is not a thing that we need to always have in our lives at all times. I don't know. I mean,
no, I think that's really true. And I think that'll become more of a public health matter in years to come. And I see more and more parents, for example, accepting that as being like, there are real hazards here. This isn't just, we can't be cavalier about what this does to any of us. I mean, I think you're right, RJ. I mean, the Bible, the New Testament's into numbers in certain ways, but I mean, and then again, Jesus had 12 disciples and no more. And then he goes after the one and leaves the 99. And like this was not a growth mindset in the way that you have today where everything.
RJ took out the parts of his Bible that say that. He's just like solely. If it ain't 1,000, he not reading it, baby. Okay.
But I also think it's wise to accept that, like, whether or not we should value numbers, we do. And in my sense, like, I find that the fact that God speaks to us within that accounting framework sometimes, like in the new book, the Big Relief, I talk about imputation a bunch. And imputation, as theology nerds know, it's a term taken from accounting. It's about,
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's about covering a debt. And it's the truth is, my life does revolve around a lot of numbers. It does revolve around followers and book sales, but also numbers of people at church, budgets raised, numbers in my bank account, numbers on the weight scale. And to say sort of with my, there are certain theological traditions that say like, well, that's just reductive. Life is not accounting. You're like, yeah, maybe not your life, but mine sure is. And not all the time. That's not all it is. Sometimes it's a courtroom, but sometimes, a lot of times, it is a balance sheet. And the fact that God deigns to communicate with us that in that way, and does talk about debts being covered, does talk about balances being wiped clean. And I find that to be an enormously gracious thing. But I also know that from the perspective of like God's economy, I think it's upside down. It's inverted. I really think that the whole expansionist, at all costs growth thing has done a lot more damage than it's done good. That said, I was talking to some people last week, some Lutheran pastors they were talking about declines in numbers. And I said, the truth is, a lot of those mega churches that explode and then die real fast, that exponential growth, like, they do convert a lot of people. Those people don't stay there usually. They need to find something more robust, something more in touch with suffering and death.
Something with a lot of women named Nancy and Susan.
Exactly. Yeah. But, they certainly have this. We benefit from their growth mindset because we're not certainly converting people. Like or at least we're doing it in a very paltry kind of way too polite kind of way, or insecure way, shall we say?
It's the curse of success. Right. That's the whole thing. It's the burden. It's the burden that comes with success. Right. Like she loves what she does, and it's good to be successful, but then it just takes over everything and creates creates anxiety and creates not a need to keep up. And
Naomi Osaka.
Naomi Osaka. Exactly.
Yeah. Well, let's end here with a wonderful thing. Amy Mantravadi is a new writer. She's been writing for Mockingbird. She's got a new book out called Broken Bonds, which is actually about the Reformation. It's a novel. It's the best thing I've read like that in a long, long time. Broken Bonds. Everyone go buy it if you're all interested in the Reformation and Martin Luther and Philip Melanchthon, but
that
with life.
So much fun.
With life and character and warmth and dynamism. She's an unbelievable writer. So checks in the mail, Amy. But she is wonderful. She wrote for us on right before Election Day that sort of translates into a post-Election Day hope. She's also an extremely fun person to follow on X, formerly Twitter. Post-Election Day hope by Amy Mantravadi on Mockingbird. She said this: like so many Americans, I've spent 2024 limiting my exposure to politics, whereas the politicians have made a concerted effort to bombard me with their vitriol. As I have been subjected to panicked campaign advertisements and online rantings of varying coherence, one message has come through loud and clear. There is a group of seriously wicked Americans, and they are a grave danger to us all. Of course, people do not agree on which Americans belong to this group of ne'er-do-wells. One person's wannabe Hitler is another's sacred vessel. But if there is a sentiment that can bring together Americans of both parties or no party, it is this. People really need to get it together and behave themselves. In a country that venerates self-help, we expect our fellow citizens to make something of themselves, specifically something that will benefit society. Ours is a land of limitless options. We believe people are free to the extent that they are not compelled. We hold nothing more sacred than the right of the individual to decide. Though we may utter it sarcastically, it is our true motto nonetheless. Make better choices. There is nothing the average American holds dearer than his or her free will. So we often say someone did something, quote, of their own volition or of their own free will. This is not to say we do not believe people can be influenced by addictions, mental health issues, or more powerful individuals, but we see these difficulties as abnormalities. If we can simply get people the therapy to overcome their difficulties or free them from oppressive structures, they will have their free will restored, or so we believe. They will be able to make good choices. But what if this most sacrosanct belief at the heart of American life is false? The current situation in America is not what I would expect from a group of people empowered to make good choices. It is what I would expect from people whose wills are bent, constantly drawn toward an evil they profess to reject. Such people are likely to demonize their opponents and engage in all sorts of unethical shenanigans to maintain power, and this is precisely what has occurred. We have also seen the uselessness of reasoned argument with our fellow voters, for humans do not act by cool reason. We are creatures of desires. Believing someone can succeed if they just make the right choices seems hopeful, but it is a recipe for despair. Our confidence in humanity's inherent goodness causes us to return continually to ineffective methods of treatment, expecting patients to heal themselves. Do more, try harder, stop being an idiot. It is neither kind nor uplifting to tell a person they are well when they are desperately sick. No mere medicine will cure what ails us. And she says this after talking about Luther and Erasmus and that whole debate. We are not slightly sick people, but dead men and women in need of resurrection. For that, we must move on to the next step, belief in a higher power. To the extent that we are not wicked, it is because of God's grace. That is what it means to have a bound will, and it is why, despite his low view of human nature, Martin Luther could still have great hope for the future. For while he believed in the bondage of the will, he also believed in the resurrection of the dead. It is also the hope for our society now. Not new methods or therapies, but miracles. For the greatest miracle God ever performed was to set captives free, and he performs it still today. She wrote that before the election, and I think Amy actually used to work in D.C. before she became a writer. But I found it to be a hopeful word. I think that I definitely fall into, as I know I've said, I've tried to remain, above or beyond politics or whatever. But I get resentful of my fellow Americans when how can you not blame and judge and say just stop being idiots or just don't do that thing that you're doing? It's absolutely occupying, and despite having a sort of formally a view that human beings were not really in control of ourselves and that we are creatures of desire, I fall into the same trap of essentially yelling at people to stop being humans and not needing to be resurrected in the same way that I need to be resurrected. Maybe that's pushing things down, abstracting things a little too much, but I think Amy's got something to say of hope that we were talking about earlier, but I could keep talking. What do you think?
I think that we are sitting Shiva right now. And I think the thing that you don't need to show up and say when people are sitting Shiva is they're in a better place. So I think for some people, this is a pretty hard word, and I think that's okay.
And probably why it was better to hear before the election rather than right after it.
Correct.
Yeah, okay. Which is when she wrote it. Which is when she wrote it.
Yeah. Also, understanding people's broken wills is important. I think understanding our own broken will is even more crucial.
Our own, not other people's, our
Yeah,
own. Yeah.
our own. Yeah. I mean, I think thinking of other people that way is a good way to find some compassion, but I think thinking of ourselves that way is the only way you're going to understand what's happening, truly.
And you don't exempt yourself from this diagnosis.
No.
Yeah.
No.
It's not a way to place ourselves above it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think the kind of vitriol people have even about I've had this thought recently, like, did people really this is so extreme, so I just apologize for anyone who hears this and is like, oh my God, that's too much. But I've had this thought where I'm like, do people really think that who they vote for determines whether or not they go to heaven or hell? Like, do they think that about other people? Like, do they think that God is that small? Right? That's kind of all it takes. That's pretty hopeless. And I mean, I guess just to go back to what we were saying in the beginning, I think it's also okay to have those thoughts, but I think recognizing that those are thoughts, right? Those are your thought, those are feelings, that's your brain chemistry, like, doing a little, like that's what's happening, and not that those are actual facts, that those certainly are not the inescapable, incomprehensible will of God. Don't confuse yourself with that. I think that that's a real mercy and definitely present in what she's saying.
Yeah, Dave, there was something that one of the speakers said at the last Mockingbird conference, which I repeat a lot when I'm praying, which is, you are God and I am not. Mm-hmm. And just the tremendous hope that there is in that God is in charge. He has the long view. He has died and been resurrected. He is on the side of humanity, including me and the people I don't like, forever and ever. Amen. And nothing's going to stop that,
Right.
And then the other person I've been thinking a lot about this week is Daryl Davis. The blues musician that we've talked about quite a bit, who made it his life mission because of his Christianity to befriend white supremacists and members of the Ku Klux Klan, right? To go out of his way to love people, not just who disagreed with him, but like who thought he sort of didn't have a right to exist.
Yeah.
Because he loved Jesus, to reach across. And I think, and that, he has a closet full of 200 robes of guys who've come out of that life because they were loved by Daryl Davis. And it feels like we have I don't like the language of choice, but it's like, well, okay, you can either just demonize everybody that you disagree with and call them a Marxist or a racist or a homophobe or a xenophobe or an idiot or whatever, or you can love them, even though they might be those things.
Right.
Like, worst case scenario, let's say they are
right.
Marxist, racist, xenophobes. It's like, well, what are you going to do then? Put them to death? Kill them?
Right.
It's like, no, you're going to love them because Jesus loves them and Jesus loves you. And guess what? Like, you're not so great either.
Right.
You've got your issues. So, yeah, I don't know. I find it. I find the whole thing just really concerning. And I think it's I'm holding in tension what you're saying, sir, because I know the mourning, and I know it's real, and the fear, and all the things that are happening. I know. And I also just think about the New Testament, where like people are literally being set on fire and thrown to lions. And, the disciples walk away from a beating, having been, rejoicing at having been counted worthy of suffering for the name, and Paul urging Timothy to pray for rulers and all those in authority, and telling the Romans to respect the governing authority, even though they're putting them to death. Mm. And it's just like, who or what are we worshiping here? Mm-hmm. Like, how much more time do I spend listening to public radio or whatever than I do, praying?
Right.
Right. What are our idols here? What does this whole thing reveal about our heart? And it makes me kind of sad. But at the same time, I'm trying, we love people in the midst of their disastrousness, because that's what Jesus does for us, right?
And our children will look back on us as being disastrous in certain ways that we can't even see.
100%. 100%.
Yes.
Yeah. I do want to say this, for some reason, is making me think of this moment in our family life years and years ago where Neil was in kindergarten and he, pulled some shenanigans because school is made for well-behaved girls. And we got a phone call to come pick him up. and he had to go home for the day. And I remember Josh called to tell me, and I kind of was freaking out. Like, what's going to be the outcome? Like, are you going to yell at him? Like, because Josh was going to pick him up. Like, what are you going to do? What's his punishment going to be? You know, and Josh just goes, I think we're going to love the hell out of that kid.
Yeah.
I think that's what we're going to do.
Yeah.
And I pray that God looks at us like that right now. You know, literally to love the hell out of us. Like, I hope that is what is happening. I pray, and I think in my best moments, I know that's what is happening right now.
That.
Well, why not? No need to keep going from that moment. Loving the hell.
Yeah.
I know you mean that literally, out of us.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's where our hope lies. Well, I'm so grateful to get to talk to the two of you today. And
Me too.
I think we'll skip Thanksgiving Day week, but we'll be back.
What?
A
early
treat.
Slacker.
December to talk to people about all sorts of other new catastrophes, but also hopefully some pleasant surprises as well, because all sorts of good things are in store, as well as continued dumpster fires.
Yeah.
So
endless humiliation and endless grace. This is Christianity.
Yes. This is terrible and beautiful things will happen.
Yeah.
All right, you guys. Talk to you later.
All right.
All right, bye.
Thank you for listening. Remember, you can find us on the web at www.mbird.com. And we'd always love to hear from you at info@mbird.com. Audio production for the Mockingcast is provided by TJ Hester. And if you like what you've heard, please drop over to iTunes and leave us a rating or review. Until next time.